Hello and welcome to The Breakdown. We are coming to you live 3 days a week. And don't forget, next week we will be live on Tuesday for the debate, for post-debate coverage of the first presidential debate. I cannot believe we're here already, and that's going to be a doozy. So be sure to tune in and hear what we have to say on Tuesday as well. I am Tara Setmayer, here with my co-host, V. Rick Wilson. Tonight, we are joined by our Lincoln Project co-founder, Steve Schmidt. And a little while later, we'll be joined by our tonight's guest, Miles Taylor, who is a former chief of staff at the Department of Homeland Security. And he's going to give us a chilling glimpse into what life was like under Donald Trump working at the DHS. Stay tuned for Miles. As always, we are closely watching the election. We are clearly only 40 days away, which is hard to believe. And we want to hear from you. So make sure that you tweet at us, #AskTheBreakdown. Tweet us your questions, and we will try to answer some of them on air later on. We've been getting really great feedback on this, so please continue to do it. And of course, my personal favorite old school method, if you want to leave us a voicemail, you can call us and leave us a voicemail. You can call the number 701-203-1208, and we'll check in later and get some of your questions and thoughts on the voicemail. Rick, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Tara, and welcome everyone. It has been a hell of a day today in this country. We are going to focus tonight on a couple of things. Look, a lot of you are asking us about the president's statement this afternoon and about the Barton Gelman article and whether you should be scared of it. The answer is you should be furious. You should be disgusted. You should be enraged. But we're going to get to that tonight as we go forward. We're going to talk to my good friend Steve Schmidt, co-founder, and we're going to talk to Miles Taylor as we go forward. We have a block first off about the grand jury indictments and the situation emerging in Louisville. And it's a matter that we've been keeping a very close eye on today. So if we could roll that, I think we've got some elements on that. Or do we not? Yeah, I thought we had elements on that.
That's all right. Go. We can talk about it for a quick second.
Sorry,
guys. It's the Breonna Taylor situation is a really difficult one, and the civil unrest that we're starting to see unfold in Louisville is something that we just don't want to continue to see. I understand people's outrage, and I'm a woman of color, and I'm married to a law enforcement officer. I come from a law enforcement family. I have a little bit of a different perspective on this. I was expecting those officers not to be criminally charged because despite how you feel about the outrage and the tragedy of her death, it was bad policy, not necessarily criminal, the way it's set up currently. So until those policies and those laws are changed, unfortunately, this is what you're going to see. And I wish that these departments would be more transparent with the public and explain to them why these things happen. I mean, it was in front of a grand jury. It wasn't just a prosecutor that decided not to prosecute. A grand jury decided not to do it. And that's the way our system works. Does it need reform? Yes. Are there bad policies like no-knock warrants and not wearing body cameras like they did in that situation that should be re-examined? Absolutely. But resorting to violence in the streets over it is not the answer. So I just hope that it doesn't get out of control. And I'm hoping that we have a president in the long term where we can have a national conversation on this, a sober national conversation where we're not completely demonizing all of our law enforcement, but we're also not ignoring systemic injustices that happen in policing Sure. and in the criminal justice system either. There needs to be balance, and we're not getting that right now. Did you want to say anything, Rick, before we do our recap?
No, I think let's go ahead and do our recap, and we'll move from there. Sorry about that, guys.
All right.
It's still an experiment.
That's all good. First things first, though, let's take a look back at the latest in our favorite White House.
Meanwhile, at Trump's White House lair.
As our nation mourns the loss of Supreme Court Justice, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I will soon announce a nominee for the United States Supreme Court. It will be a woman unless Wait. Okay, let's do a poll. Oh, there they are. How many of these have you come to? Speaking of women, I hope your husbands are okay with it. Are they okay? We will stop the radical indoctrination of our students and restore patriotic education to our schools.
A lot of it's about the genes, isn't it? Don't you believe? The racehorse theory, you think we're so different? You have good genes in Minnesota.
How about Omar of Minnesota? He's telling us how to run our country. How did you do where you came from? How is your country doing? Somebody said, he gets along well with Putin.
I'm saying to myself, but isn't that sort of a good thing?
Who do you think poisoned Alexei Navalny in Russia?
We'll talk about that at another time. We need an honest media. The free airwaves, they lie over the free airwaves. They use them and they lie. I don't know. We're going to have to look at it. They're a bunch of scoundrels.
And remember that beautiful sight? That idiot reporter from CNN got hit on the knee with a canister of tear gas, right?
And he went down. I've been hit. On November 3rd, Ohio will decide whether we end the pandemic. We now know the disease. We didn't know it. It affects virtually nobody. It's an amazing thing.
Turning out it's not just old people, Bob. Plenty of young people.
Nobody young. Below the age of 18, like nobody. By the way, open your schools. Everybody open your schools.
This is deadly stuff.
Why haven't you said anything about the U.S. hitting 200,000 deaths?
Go ahead. Anybody else? And now I'm going to say this. Make America great again, again. Make America great again, again.
Well, that was the usual moment where you got to stare into the vortex and the vortex stared back at you, the endless void of ridiculousness. Speaking of that, I want to bring in my colleague Steve Schmidt to take apart both that video of the president's daily excrescences and to go at the article that everyone is talking about tonight, the Barton Gellman article from The Atlantic about the danger that Donald Trump poses to the future of our democracy. We are unfortunately losing Steve's magnificent cowboy hat, but we're going to bring him in live now. So here we go with the Gellman article. He wrote, the worst case is not that Trump rejects the election outcome. The worst case is that he uses his power to prevent a decisive outcome against him, and that Trump would obstruct a legally unambiguous victory for Biden in the Electoral College and then Congress and seize on that uncertainty to hold on to power. Let's hear it from the president one more time before we bring Steve in and talk about this in the asset we have tagged as transition of power. Okay.
Win, lose, or draw in this election, will you commit here today for a peaceful transferal of power after the election? And there has been rioting in Louisville. There's been rioting in many cities across this country, red and your so-called red and blue states. Will you commit to making sure that there is a peaceful transferal of power after the election?
Well, we're going to have to see what happens. You know that I've been complaining very strongly about the ballots, and the ballots are a disaster.
I understand that, but people are rioting. Do you commit to making sure that there's a peaceful transferal of power?
We want to get rid of the ballots, and we'll have a very peaceful. There won't be a transfer, frankly. There'll be a continuation. The ballots are out of control. You know it. And you know who knows it better than anybody else? The Democrats know it better than anybody else. Go ahead.
Well, joining me now is Steve Schmidt and his magnificent cowboy hat. But I got to say, Steve, I watched that today, and you and I have been talking about this almost all day long today. This is a guy who just ripped off the mask. He's not even pretending anymore. We are at the precipice now with a president who is openly declaring he's adopting the tactics of Castro and Maduro and Putin and the rest of the dog's breakfast of authoritarians. I mean, this was not what they envisioned in the Federalist 10.
The peaceful transition of power commenced in 1797, as you know, Rick, and George III was curious about what George Washington would do. What would the man who could be a king, the man who could be an emperor, the man who could serve in that position for life, what would he do? And what he did is he became the first human being in almost 2,000 years of history to walk away from power, to retire, and to set forth a magnificent American tradition, which is the peaceful transition of power, which takes place under the oldest written constitution for the oldest constitutional republic in the world. Think about a moment when Harry Truman is playing cards at the house with Sam Rayburn and some others, and he gets a call from the White House, and he's told to return immediately. And upon returning, he's greeted by Eleanor Roosevelt. And Eleanor Roosevelt says, "Harry, the president is dead." And Harry Truman looks at her and says, "Mrs. Roosevelt, is there anything I can do for you?" And she looks back at him and says, "No, Mr. President. Is there anything I can do for you?" And he said in that moment that he felt the weight of all the stars and the moons and all of heaven upon his shoulders. Through Civil War, through World War, through the Vietnam War and the turmoil of the 1960s, we have never had an American president speculate that an election in which he loses will therefore be illegitimate. We've never heard an American president intimate that he will take action to remain in power despite losing the popular will of the people through the Electoral College and through the popular vote. He is intimating political violence. He is intimating an end of the American experiment, and we should take him seriously as a heart attack. When there are stories in the paper that talk about the desire to replace electors in states with Trump stooges, what possible reason could there be for that? It's like finding 30 tons of ammonium nitrate in someone's storage facility. It's not for a good purpose. Bad stuff. And so we are at a dangerous hour in this country, and make no mistake about it at all. In that supercut that we did, we saw Donald Trump celebrating violence done against one of the most prominent and respected journalists in the country.
Yep.
We see Donald Trump intimating about his desire to close media organizations. So, President of the United States. Ronald Reagan was right when he talked about freedom always being a generation away from being extinguished. All over the world, we see democratic rescission. Hungary, Poland, see the rise of far-right nationalist parties. But that this could be happening in the United States of America in 2020 shocks the conscience. But understand this, it's happening. It's happening right now. And he is aided and abetted by an illiberal caucus, by collaborators, and I use that word intentionally, in a great assault on the ideas and ideals and traditions of the country that is profoundly undemocratic and is an assault on the memory of every patriot from Lexington and Concord to Gettysburg to Normandy to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, who fought for the dignity of the American citizen to be able to determine our future as a government of the people, by the people, for the people. It is an outrageous hour in this presidency and in the history of this country. And we ought to understand that democracy itself is now on the line in this election, and no one needs to hear any other words other than the words of Donald Trump to understand that what he's saying, he means. And we should wake up about that.
Absolutely. And this is not a joke, people. This is not Trump being Trump. This is not some I'm going to troll the media act by Donald Trump. These things that he's talking about, he has what Steve mentioned. There are Trump operatives and Trump attorneys in 11 states that we know of right now who are seeking to invalidate ballots, who are seeking to invalidate absentee voting, who are seeking to invalidate early voting, who are seeking to disqualify electors. These people are in the middle of this right now. They are doing this right now. There are not a lot of folks on the Republican side who have a single tiny, even fraction of integrity enough to say, Mr. President, stop it. Mr. President, enough. None of them will come out and say that. We're going to have to take this fight all the way to Election Day, folks. It is going to be ugly. It is going to get loud. We're going to be at the tip of the spear as much as we possibly can on it. We will not be intimidated. We will not be shut down. We will not be shut up. We will not have anybody come at us without an overwhelming response. This is going to be a hell of a fight. So Steve and I and the rest of the Lincoln Project founders and Tara and the other folks who are in this battle, we are all even more conscious today of the stakes at hand. This is a big deal. Absolutely. This president is not just being Trump. He's not just playing games. He is giving you a preview of the things to come. We have folks that were working with us now who are experts on just how authoritarians do this. This is what he's doing. He has told us for a long time now, he admires authoritarians. He likes their power. He likes their swagger. He likes their fancy uniforms. But now he's adopting their tactics against the American people. This is
blatantly
by far the most blatant effort we have ever seen in any of our lifetimes for a president to do anything like this at all. So with that, Tara, I'll throw it back to you.
You know, I echo both you and Steve and the, righteous anger about what we're seeing unfold. This is happening right in front of our faces. This isn't happening behind the scenes. And before I bring in Miles, who's going to talk about what he saw behind the scenes, this is what we see in public. He is so emboldened now because he's surrounded by, as Steve said, the collaborators. The Republicans have not done their jobs as senators checking with their checks and balances. They have abdicated this responsibility every freaking step of the way, from the impeachment to letting him get away with the talk of the election integrity aspect of this. Susan Collins clutches her pearls every once in a while and says that, she's upset and deeply disturbed or saddened or whatever the hell she says, some, milquetoast response. This is not a joke. This Atlantic article, and I encourage everyone out there to read it. It's lengthy, but it is worth it because it really gives an in-depth look into the efforts that are going on to suppress the vote in preparation also for Donald Trump not leaving if he loses, and the fact that he has help not only from Bill Barr, but also from the Republicans in office that are trying to facilitate this. This is what raw political power looks like, and this is how democracies die. And it is up to us to make sure that that does not happen. So, on that note, I want to bring in our next guest, Miles Taylor, who I had the opportunity to interview on my podcast last week. And have the opportunity to work with Miles on his new group, Repair. Miles is a veteran of the George W. Bush administration. Before that, he worked on Capitol Hill. I think we overlapped while he was on the Hill. During the Trump administration, though, he served as the chief of staff to the secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. He left DHS in 2019, and he is the co-founder of, like I said, the group Repair, which he'll talk about, which stands for the Republican Political Alliance for Integrity and Reform, which is focused on repairing the GOP, what's left of it, post-Trump. Miles Taylor, welcome to The Breakdown.
Thank you for having me, Tara. Look, I got to say something out of the gate. I've been sitting here listening to you guys talk about this president and talk about his authoritarian impulses. And it's the kind of thing that some people had the foresight in 2016 to predict about Donald Trump, including some of you. Some had the foresight in the first year of his presidency to say it would be like this. And there are a lot of people like me who in that first year and in 2016 said, let's not rush to conclusions. That's kind of hyperbolic talk. That's not who this man is. I'm ready to tell you today, I was completely wrong about that. Completely wrong about that. And through firsthand experience in that administration, I came away believing firmly that the president has genuine authoritarian impulses, and it's something I didn't expect I would ever say in my lifetime in this country, right? My career was born from 9/11. I wanted to focus my entire professional life on making sure a day like that wouldn't happen again and dedicating my career to what I thought was the mission of this country, and that's the advancement of human freedom, both here in the United States, but around the world. And I never thought that I would be on the front lines of defending human freedom here in our city streets and in Washington, D.C. And because of what the president's trying to do, for the first time in my life, I feel a much more intimate connection to the people we saw in places like, Ukraine and Belarus, and, reach back in time, Eastern Europe. The great fights for freedom, of the past are now resonant here in the United States because we have a president talking like a dictator. This is alarming. And look, this is coming from someone who's not a political guy. I haven't spent my career on campaigns, and I'm certainly not a Democrat. I've been a lifelong Republican. So it pains me to say this, but look, everything you guys have been saying tonight is resonant and alarming.
Miles, it's all of us are exasperated on this, and I just don't know if the American people have gotten it just yet. I hope they do. That's why we're all doing what we're doing, is to spread the word and make sure that the American people understand that this is DEFCON 1. It really is. It is DEFCON 1 for our constitutional republic with this guy. And, you've talked in the past about some of the things that Donald Trump has said and done, and you just talked now about his authoritarian tendencies. Let's listen to Donald Trump in his own words talk about that to Bob Woodward, and we'll get your reaction out of the gate.
That I get along very well with Erdogan, even though you're not supposed to, because everyone says what a horrible guy. But for me, it works out good. It's funny that the relationships I have, the tougher and meaner they are, the better I get along with them. You'll explain that to me someday, okay? But maybe it's not a bad thing. The easy ones are the ones I maybe don't like as much or don't get along with as much.
I'm going to explain it
in his
to
own
you.
words.
We don't have to wait. We don't have to wait one day for Bob Woodward to explain it. I will tell you, and this is my supposition, but I think it's the best one. We've had lots of conversations about this in the administration. I want to say it's not just who the hell cares about Miles Taylor. Who cares who I am? But the cabinet secretaries from this administration, who are household names that have had these same conversations with me. And the best conclusion we've all come to is that the reason Donald Trump loves dictators is because the thing he loves more than anything is being seen as rich and being seen as a winner. And the president wants to leave office and continue to be rich. And he knows that around the world, the people who can help him stay rich are not leaders from democratic countries who live under the regime of checks and balances like we do. They're leaders from authoritarian states who can cut deals, cut side deals, cut all sorts of deals on their own accord to help people make money and abrogate the rule of law. The president knows that, and I'm not the first person to say that. If you go, even
the cat's alarmed. Even the cat's alarmed.
The pets are even worried. I mean, that's really what this has come down to. But the president knows this. And I'm not the first one to say this. John Bolton had the same supposition when he talked about his perception that the president had a warm and friendly relationship with Erdogan in Turkey, who the president calls Erdogan because he doesn't actually read his briefing memos or listen to his advisors or really know much of anything about international politics other than his animating impulse is his own self-interest. But the president, was called out by Bolton, who thought that he was acting the way he did with Turkey because he wanted to be able to get a good deal from Erdogan in the future. That's what we believed in the administration, is that the president liked Putin and he liked Kim Jong-un and he liked President Xi in China and he liked Erdogan in Turkey because he thought one day these guys would be able to help him cut side deals for his business to make money. Again, I've got to tell you, I can't believe those words are coming out of my mouth in the 21st century. I would have looked into the future and saw this video and said, what happened to Miles Taylor? He lost his mind and he's going crazy on the president. But this is reality, folks. This is the real man who's the commander-in-chief right now, and we should be worried about it. But more importantly, we have a chance to take action, and that's in a couple of weeks.
Well, let's bring Steve back into the conversation here. And I want to ask, while Tara is handling the feline invaders.
I'll say this about that. I'll say this about that cat. Like when that cat jumps up on Tara, it's like, wow, that's a nice cat. Like, and they look so happy. Now, if you had that cat in your lap, I get more of a Spectre feeling from the James Bond movie. Number one.
Yes.
That's a look we don't want to see. So
I've got to get our chief of staff to
put that on
a requisition for a hairless cat.
Put that on the table.
Tiki's always in the business. He's part of it all in the household.
Tiki's the best cat. Everybody knows it. Tiki's absolutely the greatest cat in the whole world. People, I've seen other cats. There's not actually a better cat than Tiki.
He's got a better Trump imitation.
I think.
So,
go ahead, Steve. Sorry for the cat distraction.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. You're up, Steve.
I mean, look, I want to open this conversation up between Steve and Miles and Sarah. You saw a lot of this behavior in the White House on the way that the people around him were shocked, they were appalled, they were disgusted, they were horrified, and yet still they stayed in many cases. Some left, but many stayed. Are you hearing anything from your people inside the White House now that there's a level of brittleness and terror among the staff about what's going to happen and how far he'll go?
Yes. Look, if I could leave everyone with one takeaway tonight, it's this: the so-called axis of adults, the guardrails around Donald Trump in the first year, a little bit less so in year 2, and then less so in year 3. The axis of adults has been broken by this president, and the era of enablers has begun. And this is more than anything why people should be worried about a second term of Donald Trump. He has no restrictions anymore. He's got no guardrails. He has very few people telling him the truth and speaking truth to power. So the Oval Office has become an echo chamber. And people in the administration, people who are in very senior positions close to the president, are worried that the equation has flipped. I usually call it 80-20. When this administration started, look, you got to give Donald Trump some credit. He pulled together a pretty good crew. I would say about 80% of people were highly qualified for their jobs and would have been in those cabinet secretary positions or other positions in another Republican administration. There was a pretty good team in place. 20% were campaign lackeys and advisors from the island of misfit toys that Donald Trump brought into the White House with him. That's flipped. We've now got 80% island of misfit toys and 20% or so people who are actually qualified to be in their jobs in the federal government, in these political positions. That's really concerning. And the people on the inside feel that way. All right. There's a few rational voices left. They're concerned. But they also are actually saying they're worried about a second term of the president. You know, before I left, Rick, a very senior advisor to the president that all of you would know and all the viewers would know, said to me that the second term would be shock and awe. And I've been saying that publicly, but those were his exact words. He said it's going to be shock and awe. And he had a list of executive orders in his drawer. This isn't a joke. This feels like Bond villain stuff, but in like the bureaucratic sense. He had a locked drawer that had executive orders that he'd worked on with the White House counsel's office and a very small group of people. And they were things that were unacceptable to issue in a first presidential term because they knew they would lose voters because they would be so extreme. But in the second presidential term.
What's an example?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's the thing, Steve, is they wouldn't even bring me into the fold on what some of those things were. There'd be hints on immigration, for instance.
We're just going to say it's like the Stephen Miller wet dream of a second term. And
I won't confirm or deny if that's the White House advisor that I'm talking about. Suffice to say, it's all the crazy things that they think they could get away with potentially legally, but politically would be so unpalatable that the president would lose, even core parts of his base of support. And that was disturbing to have someone brag to me about that. Go ahead.
One thing I was always curious about, what induced me to finally leave the party was the child separation policy on the border. And what I was curious about from inside, did anybody ever say that we think that's an illegal or an immoral order in the context of any one of a number of different Trump era policies to the president? Was it discussed in DHS? Were there border patrol who said, get the fuck out of here? I'm not doing that. I'm not executing that order. I think it's an illegal order.
Steve, it's a great question. And I've got to give you fair context from the start. Is when the policy was devised and when it was decided upon by the administration, I'd spent most of that period as the Secretary's national security advisor on counterterrorism and intelligence issues. So I only kind of witnessed some of that from the periphery. But then I was there as the deputy chief of staff and then the chief through the implementation. And ultimately, when the practice was put on hold. What I'll tell you is this, and it's a complicated story, but the boiled down version is this. In year one of the administration, the White House came to the Department of Homeland Security and John Kelly and said, we want to implement a deliberate policy of ripping children away from their parents at the border so we scare migrants from coming to the border. Kelly thought that was so sickening. He said to the White House behind the scenes, absolutely, I will not do it. Now, publicly, when asked what options were on the table, Kelly said all options are on the table for border security. But behind the scenes, he said, I will never implement a policy that anyone who shows up, we just rip the kid apart. What does that even mean? Why would you even do that? So what ended up happening is in the second year of the administration, when Kirstjen Nielsen came in as secretary, they tried the same tactic. The White House said, anyone who shows up at the border, if they've got a kid, let's rip them apart, and that will scare these families so that they don't come to the border anymore. But that's not the way U.S. law works. If you come to the U.S. border, whether you've got kids or not kids, and if you claim asylum and say I'm fleeing violence and persecution, under our law, you go through a process so that we can consider in the courts whether you are an asylum seeker. So what the White House then did was they worked with the Attorney General and they proposed what was called a zero tolerance policy. And they said, fine, we're not going to rip all kids away from their parents. However, if someone sneaks across the border between the ports of entry, the places where you're allowed to show up and claim asylum, that is a crime under federal law. It is. It's a crime to sneak between the border, and a lot of criminals come through that way and drugs come through that way. And they said instead of prosecuting, roughly at that point in time, we were prosecuting 20% of the people who crossed illegally, usually not families. They said, we're going to start prosecuting 100% of people who cross illegally. What that meant, Steve, is that by prosecuting 100%, there was a secondary consequence of children. If someone showed up with a kid and they got prosecuted, well, they've got to go to the courthouse. They've got to go to jail for a brief period. Normally, that's okay because you turn them around very quickly. And under the Obama administration, guess what? Child separation happened because you don't take kids to a jail. That's sick and that's wrong. When you prosecute the parent, you don't send the child into a jail cell. So you have to have them in the custody of the government for a brief period. But again, I say a brief period because that's when you're doing low-level numbers. So they said they were going to do this. They're going to prosecute 100%. And behind the scenes, what people don't know is at the time Kirstjen Nielsen said, wait, we don't have the resources to do 100%. Unless you guys give us 1,000 judges and a zillion lawyers at the border, the process is going to slow down and we're not going to be able to put people back together in time. And the White House said, don't worry about it, you're totally wrong. And the Justice Department said, don't worry about it, you're totally wrong. And the White House reached into our agencies at DHS and had some of our agency leaders who were Trump acolytes say, don't worry about it, you're totally wrong. We have the resources, no one's going to be apart for too long, it'll go very quickly. They even took a vote at the White House in May of that year, and they asked everyone, who's for going forward with this policy? Everyone raised their hand but Kirstjen Nielsen. She said, we are literally not ready. I'm not convinced that you guys are going to do this process fast enough that it's not going to be a disaster. They outvoted her, it went forward. She was completely right. It was the perfect example of a policy process gone awry in this administration with horrible and disgusting consequences. This should have been something foreseeable. This should have been something that was avoided. And this should have been something that never happened in the United States. But instead it did, because this administration rushes through what it wants to do without thought of the secondary consequences.
Miles, since we're talking about that is just unreal. And since we're talking about immigration, I want to ask you something else that I want you to share with our audience about what you heard. Just that furthers the inhumanity and the absolute batshit crazy things that Donald Trump would ask you guys to do at DHS. His obsession with the wall, and what things to do to stop people from coming through. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, Tara, you and I have had a chance to chat about this before, and I'm glad you asked. And I promised folks I was going to try to keep it as light as I could tonight, but this is serious stuff. And the president's
People need to know.
inhumanity, it's true. His inhumanity really was most evident when he talked about these people that are fleeing violence and persecution, trying to come to the United States, right? So we're a nation of immigrants, right? Ronald Reagan, quoting John Winthrop, called us a shining city upon a hill, and he painted that picture of an America that welcomed people from all corners of the globe, freedom-loving people to this country. Donald Trump has turned us into Fortress America and a place that's unwelcoming towards migrants. And you could have made the case at the beginning of this administration that that was really a policy position. He was just tough on immigration, but the family members around him and other people would say, but he really is caring and he's compassionate. When Donald Trump told us he wanted us to shoot migrants at the border to keep them from coming into the United States, I didn't think that was a terribly compassionate man. And that wasn't a joke. That wasn't the president being facetious. He actually said to us, recognizing that people would be alarmed in the room at the suggestion that we might shoot innocent people coming into the border. He said, well, it's not.
Take us in that room. Take us in the room.
Yeah.
What was that?
Sure. Yeah. Look, we're in the conversation. We're in a conversation in the Oval Office with the president, and he is frustrated. He is frustrated. Yeah, he's frustrated that there's caravans of people coming to the border, and he says we got to stop them. You got to stop them. And he says, you know, why can't we just shoot at them? He says we don't have to shoot to kill. Just shoot them in the leg. Just shoot them in the leg to stop them. Again, we're talking
women and
about
children.
primarily women and children, and a lot of single adult males.
So when that happens in the room, what happens next, right? So you're sitting in there, you're not senior enough to be the person, right? Who's like, Mr. President, who speaks? Who's the next person who speaks? Tell me what happens after he says that.
People like me shouldn't have to, Steve, but unfortunately, and my goal here is not to name names. The only name I really want on my lips is the president's, but there are people around the president that you would expect to be the sober-minded uncle that the kids could turn to and say, can you please, you know, get the president to cool off or take this into another room? And those people don't stand up. However, what I will say
so
is
no one says anything. He says these things and everyone just goes, yes, Mr.
There are
President,
a number
they stare
of
into
people,
the abyss. What do they do?
especially after the axis of adults was broken. A lot of people would just kind of nod or laugh or shift uncomfortably. But there were a handful of folks left in year 2 and 3 that still would say to the president, importantly, and thank God, sir, that's not legal or American or acceptable. It's not something we're allowed to do. And I can say it specifically with this instance, I'll name 2 people, Kirstjen Nielsen and Jim Mattis as Secretary of Defense, both forcefully pushed back against the president on multiple occasions and said, that's not how the use of force works, right? We can't deploy U.S. troops to the border to shoot innocent civilians. It's not how it works, and we're not going to do it. And the president still didn't listen to them. And in fact, at one point after those conversations, he went on TV and he said, if they throw rocks, we'll use rifles, right? Again, inciting violence down the border.
What I'm trying to get to is in a second term, when you talk about that inversion, right, the 2080, are there people around him even now that he says something like that they take it as an order, that they'll try to go execute that? That like someone will walk out of the Oval Office in downrage and say, let's shoot people on the U.S.-Mexican border who were trying to apply for a refugee status. That's what the president wants.
Yeah, not only are there people like that there now, there were people like that there then. I mean, I can remember multiple meetings. And let me put a caveat here. I was not Donald Trump's best friend. I did not go watch movies with him in the West Wing, right? We were not incredibly close. But I had enough of an experience in Oval Office meetings and Situation Room meetings and Air Force One flights and events with the president to see this in action. And there were people, even in years 1 and 2 of the administration, who would walk out of a meeting with the president and say, well, okay, the president ordered us to do it. And there would have to be folks like us who would say, whoa, 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 whoa. Hold on, stop. The president does crazy things every hour of every day. That's not how this works. And fortunately, when people like John Kelly were there as chief of staff, there was a little bit more of a lid on meetings like that, where people would walk out, the president would give an insane order, oftentimes an unlawful order, and the chief would be able to be the one that stepped forward and said, hey, we're going to go back to him on this later today. Don't go do anything yet. I'm very
Miles,
that there are people that have more to say.
I think Steve will appreciate this story. You told this story to me and Molly Jong-Fast on my podcast. Would you tell the story about taking notes in the Oval?
Yeah, I mean that happened to me once, Rick. And I can't remember if I told you the one about me. I've seen it happen with multiple people with the president. But I mean, yeah, one time. And look, there's no better evidence of a guilty conscience than a person who sees another person documenting their activities and they immediately seize up and get angry. And especially in the Oval Office of the White House with the president. One time we were having a meeting with the president and I was taking notes because that's what you're supposed to do. Any of us who've served in presidential administrations, when the boss is talking about weighty national issues, you write it down so you know that you're executing his intent faithfully, and you can ask the follow-up questions and you can document his direction. Those are really important moments to document so that you know what to do next. And we were sitting in a meeting talking about a weighty issue and a serious issue with the president. I'm writing this down in my notes, what he's saying we've got to do next. And he looks over at me from the Resolute desk and says, what the fuck are you doing? And I pause and I look up and it's, are you fucking taking notes? Put that away. And I mean, well, what do you do? I mean, I don't want to leave the Oval Office with my boss, the Secretary of Homeland Security, and say, I think the president said, do da-da-da-da, right? You're supposed to leave and say, this is what he said. But then I wrote, and I didn't tell you this, Rick, and I still have this piece of paper, and then I wrote, and he said, stop fucking taking notes, because I didn't want to forget that.
Wow, that is remarkable because it's consistent, right? We heard about that in the Mueller report where he said to Don McGahn, who's the White House counsel, why, only, what did he say? No lawyer has ever taken notes. He made a comment about taking notes, which is a normal thing for a lawyer to do, especially the White House counsel. So it's consistent with what he has said in the past about that.
Tara, we had another meeting in the White House Situation Room about hurricane response. And there was someone who was a top aide that was sitting behind him and taking notes about what he was saying on hurricane response. Now, what he was saying at that moment was particularly crazy, and I can understand why someone would want no one to be taking notes. But he turned to that person and verbatim said the same thing. He said, are you fucking writing this down? But that's what happens in a White House.
So let me ask you this while my cat continues to bomb the show. We had a conversation on my podcast about judges, and we were talking about, his desire to do authoritarian things and how he is enamored with these people. Tell the story about how he feels about judges, since we're now in this big fight over the Supreme Court, and this is in front of mind for a lot of people. How does Donald Trump feel about judges and the judicial system?
It's disturbing. And I want to preface it with this. I actually do believe in this notion that presidents deserve to be able to conduct their deliberations with advisors and in confidence. I believe that duty and that measure of respect should not be afforded to a president when in those deliberations and discussions, they veer so far afield of norms, right, and acceptable behavior. And in these instances I'm talking about, the president veered far from those. And I think it's important for the American people to hear those anecdotes. So one day, another meeting that we were having in the Oval Office with the president, and we were talking about some of these court cases that had come down ruling against his immigration policies, some of his national security policies. The president was livid, and he turned to staff and he said, can't we just get rid of the judges? I want to get rid of all the judges. And then it wasn't just an errant complaint, because the president proceeded to say, I want you guys, the people in the room, to draft legislation and send it to Capitol Hill, getting rid of some of these judges. We need to go get rid of some of these judges. Are you going to do it or what? Are you going to do it? And I won't say who, but someone in the room, just because they wanted to end the conversation, said, yeah, we'll do it. Don't worry about it, Mr. President. We'll do it. Right? Said, we're going to go write up a bill and send it to Congress to get rid of the judges. They just wanted to move on because that's not what the meeting was about. It was about something totally different. But this is the impulse of the President of the United States, is let's just get rid of that third branch of government that's been such a distraction for me. I don't know what's more authoritarian than that.
Yeah, get rid of that. Get rid of that.
We've now worked together long enough on the Lincoln Project that for sure that's the path I would have taken. Sure, we'll do it.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
Hey, let's do this thing about that stuff. Sure.
Oh my God!
But here's the thing. Here's the thing, Steve. Is that was probably the second year, I want to say, of the administration. It was probably the end of the second year. I sincerely believe that there would be a meeting like that this year, where someone in the room would say, "We'll do it," and then they would go do it. And they would write up a piece of legislation that kind of had the veneer of legitimacy, that they would maybe talk to Lindsey Graham about in the Senate and say, is there a way we could maybe reduce, some of the circuit court judges in these liberal parts of the country, and try to give it some legitimacy. And it would have originated in that moment of them saying, well, I got to find a way to make the president's request happen, but make it look like it's the right thing to do. That's what's concerning, is people will make that jump from totally crazy to maybe partly crazy without a second thought.
And Miles,
it's a slippery slope of crazy.
What was the trigger for you? What was the final line? I mean, what you did took integrity and guts, and I think you're faithful to your oath that you took to the Constitution. You don't take an oath to the president or the Republican Party, as as I know, that, maybe a lot of people don't know that, when you go to work in the White House, you don't take an oath to the president, your duties to the country, and you kept faith with that. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about that?
There was a proximate cause, and then there was the total tonnage of bad experiences, which was enough to stop a freight train on the tracks. Okay. But the proximate cause was a moment in April of 2019 when we were at the border and the president was telling us behind the scenes, I want you to shut down the entire border. Don't let anyone else in. And we said, Mr. President, and this was for the 100th time, we'd said, it's not something we have the authority to do. Under U.S. law, people can come to the border and claim asylum, and our courts have got to consider those cases. So you can't just say the whole thing's closed and no one can come in. But the president was adamant that we say the whole border's closed. And the words he used with us behind the scenes were, he said, tell the judges when they, because we said that, look, the judges won't allow this to happen. We'll get enjoined by the courts immediately, and they'll say you have to, move forward with letting these people in. He said, just tell them the bins are full. Tell them the bins are completely full. And we joked about that somewhat darkly afterwards and said, I remember saying to the secretary on the flight back, what the hell does he mean the bins? Does he think like we're putting people in laundry bins, or like what does he think is happening here? But he kept saying, he said, just tell them the bins are full, right? Just tell them the bins are full. And so that day he went and did a public event at the border with our Border Patrol agents, and he said something similar. He's like, we got to close it down. Just tell them we're full. Tell them we don't have any room. Just tell them. And, people were kind of shifting uncomfortably in the room. Afterwards, the president brought it up again. He would not let this go.
He said it publicly. He said that publicly. Not the bins.
Would not let it go.
Just, we're full. He said that.
Yeah, he said we're full. Just tell them we're full that same day. And then behind the scenes afterwards, he was pushing the issue. And he said, just shut it all down. Just close it. And I won't say the specific individual's name. I don't want to make their life harder, but a very senior official said back to the president, sir, that it's just not legal. We won't be able to do it. And the president said, look, if you get in trouble with the law because of this, I'll pardon you. He said, don't worry about it. And later the White House said that was a joke when the story came out. It was not a joke. The president wasn't joking. He was saying, if you break the law by denying these people entry into the United States, I will give you a get out of jail free card. If that's not political corruption, I do not know what is. And after I saw that, I decided, look, yeah, I'm done here. Because we had stopped being able to do enough good. And, we thought for a while we were keeping stuff from getting past the goalie, some bad things. But at that point, I thought there's really nothing that can constrain this man, and it's certainly not going to be me. And it's time for us to pack up and leave.
You know, Miles, I had one more question before we move on to our next block. You had a story that you've told about how you discovered we were pulling out of Syria, and I'd love for you to tell us that story and about why that sort of rang your bell about Turkish and Russian interest in the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, look, actually, even more than that, Rick, I think that this little anecdote tells you how national security decisions of the highest consequence, have been made in the first term, which should give you an idea of how they might be made in the second term. So the president spent a lot of time talking about how he wanted to pull out U.S. forces from areas around the globe. And regularly, his national security cabinet pushed back and explained to the president, listen, sometimes we've got U.S. troops in places so that they can fight downrange, so that we don't have to fight bad guys here on our city streets. Something that still doesn't really resonate with the president. Syria in particular, he wanted to pull U.S. forces out of Syria. But you know, the president had been convinced, at least we thought, that we were going to put this through a policy process, that we were going to consider all the upsides and downsides and the insides out of pulling U.S. troops out of Syria and the national security implications. And here's the thing, here's the context, because at the time, there were real scary, dangerous terrorist plots emanating from Syria that we were worried we wouldn't be able to stop unless we had U.S. boots on the ground. We thought we were in the middle of a process to bring the president options for how over time we could handle the situation in Syria. And then one morning, me, John Bolton, John Kelly, and Kirstjen Nielsen were sitting in the chief of staff's office at the White House, and we look up on the television, and it's CNN. And on the chyron, that lower third, it says something like U.S. pullout from Syria. That was the first that we'd heard about it. I'm pretty sure that's the first the Secretary of Defense had heard about it. And all hell broke loose. The president woke up one morning after maybe a bad meal or a bad night of sleep and just decided we're going to pull U.S. forces out of a place where we were actively going after bad guys plotting to kill Americans. And he did it by tweet, and he did it without consulting his team. And of course, within days, Jim Mattis resigned as Secretary of Defense. John Kelly left as Chief of Staff. I wish I'd resigned on the spot at that moment, but there were some scarier things happening at the Department of Homeland Security where we felt like we needed to stay in the chair for a little while longer.
Well, at least the Turkish. Go ahead, Steve. Go.
Miles, does Kirstjen Nielsen, does she get an unfair shake here?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, she wouldn't want me out here defending her, but look, there's probably no one, really, she's not going to like me saying this, but there's probably no one who held the president accountable more behind the scenes than Kirstjen Nielsen and a number of others. And some of those people got a bad rap because they went out and, you know, they were old school and they thought, look, when the president makes a decision, then it's a decision. You know, you go out and you defend it and you do the best you can, but behind the scenes, you work really hard to get the right decision in the first place. And boy, I'll say this of Kirstjen Nielsen, behind the scenes, she worked very, very hard to get the president to the right decision. And sometimes that was extraordinarily contentious because the president only hears what he wants to hear, and he does not like it when people try to speak truth to him. And there was a number of other folks in the administration like that. But by the third year, he'd largely purged all of them because anyone that tried to push back against him in private, he decided they were going to get the guillotine.
Can you comment on the role in particular?
I was just going to ask Rick, do you think those three in particular, Mattis, Kelly, and Nielsen, have an obligation to tell the country what they saw in the next 40 days?
I hope that anyone and everyone who shares the sentiments that I've laid out tonight will come and do that. And I think that the majority of folks that I served with at a senior level in that time period in the administration feel exactly as I feel and share some of the opinions I've expressed tonight. I'm not going to assign that to any one of them specifically, but I do hope we see more folks come forward. And the organization that Tara and I have started, the Repair Alliance, Repair is focused on, trying to undo some of the damage that Trump's done and restore the GOP and repair the country in the post-Trump period, but also in this immediate window in the lead up to the election to try to get more people to speak up and talk about what they experienced. So we're in conversations with all sorts of folks from the administration, both in the administration and out of it, to try to get them to come forward, and we'll see. But in the meantime, I'll say this. I'm very encouraged by the folks that we have been able to get to step forward. It's not the household names Americans know, but it's also not the people that should have had to come forward. A lot of the household names that people know are at the end of their careers, and they don't have as much to, or people who are in the middle of their careers with everything to lose and their futures. But people like Elizabeth Newman and John Mitnick and Olivia Troy and Bob Shanks and Josh Venable, not household names before. They should be household names now, because these are people who are honest, good public servants who've served our country. They're patriots. And they've said, look, I experienced the same thing. This president is unfit for office, and they're telling the truth. And we should admire them for doing that. And I think we'll have a few more of those that speak out before the election.
You know, Miles,
go ahead. Go, Tara.
The question that I wanted to, the area I wanted to get to, that I wanted to make sure we talked about, because we didn't talk about it on the podcast, and I don't think you talked about it on Rick's. And I said, great, we can wait and talk about it here on the breakdown. It's the idea of radicalization and this whole obsession with Trump and white identity. I want to roll an ad first, and then we'll talk about it after the ad.
Donald Trump is making America more dangerous. 2 millionaire lawyers in front of their mansion threaten peaceful demonstrators with guns. The demonstrators are marching to the mayor's house to protest the killing of an unarmed black man by police. Donald Trump honors them at the convention. Their only achievement, they threatened peaceful black demonstrators with guns. Less than 24 hours later, a young man follows their example and kills 2 unarmed demonstrators. A young, impressionable man sat in the front of a Trump rally and heard his message of hate and division. Today, he's hailed as a hero by Trump supporters. This is sick. This is wrong. This is dangerous. And as long as Donald Trump is president, he'll keep encouraging the kooks, the crazies, the extremists, the angry fringe. It doesn't have to be this way. Reject the hate. Reject the violence. America or Donald Trump? Stand up for America. The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Miles, this idea of Trump encouraging these white supremacists and these militia groups, these vigilantes, lionizing people like Kyle Rittenhouse, this is all part of a very dangerous identity politics ploy that he's using, which is also out of the authoritarian playbook of division. But can you talk about the real threat that white supremacist violence poses to this country? You were at DHS. There was a report that was suppressed about this. Can you talk about this honestly? Is this really a threat that we should be paying attention to?
It is a threat, but I want to ask a semi-rhetorical question up front, and that would be, what do white supremacists and QAnon conspiracy theorists and Russian trolls have in common? What they all have in common is that they're bad guys, that they support the president, and that the president really likes their support and doesn't want to call them out.
Right.
And that's the story here. That's why consistently you see these bad actors that are so obviously bad actors, and sometimes criminals or terrorists. And the president won't call it out because they like him. And if people support him, he likes those people. That was my experience when it came to domestic terrorism. When we came into the Department of Homeland Security at the beginning of this administration with John Kelly, it was clear that the ISIS threat was the premier terrorist threat to the United States. We were still dealing with very serious terror plots coming out of Syria. But what the FBI and DHS intelligence analysts were telling us at the time was there was a very alarming uptick in domestic terrorism. And that uptick was primarily driven by white supremacists and other racially motivated violent extremist groups. We flagged this for the White House. In fact, we sounded the alarm, and the White House didn't want to hear it. In fact, in that time period, we were in the middle of writing with the White House the National Counterterrorism Strategy to set the tone for the president's first term in office about what we were going to do to go after the bad guys, whether they were international or domestic. Problem was the White House didn't want to talk about domestic terrorism. And I'm going to tell you why. Because when people, including intelligence analysts, referred to it as right-wing extremism, because a lot of these organizations were deriving their inspiration from right-wing ideologies, the White House said, well, they're politicizing it. These intelligence agencies, they're politicizing it. This is not a real threat. And they buried their heads in the sand. In fact, the Secretary of Homeland Security personally sent a draft of the National Counterterrorism Strategy to the White House that had a whole big section about combating domestic terrorism and had a whole plan about how we would do it. But it needed to be issued by the White House because that's how you get a whole of government response. You get the whole government to work together when the White House says, this is what we're going to do. The White House rejected it. And ultimately, in the National Counterterrorism Strategy, there are 2 sentences about domestic terrorism. And they told us, don't worry, we'll put out a separate plan. I challenge anyone to go find me that separate plan. It doesn't exist.
Right. Miles, let me ask you a question about that. That was at the same time that Steve Bannon was still in the White House. And the Steve Bannon, Stephen Miller, and a few of the other folks that were in that sort of post-Breitbart white gnat space, did you have any evidence that Bannon had a role in quashing that?
Not Bannon personally, but, again, because I'm trying to keep, I'm not trying to do the backstabbing tell-all, but people very close to Steve Bannon, people that Steve Bannon had brought on board personally opposed having domestic terrorism be a feature in that strategy, and were adamant that the strategy focus only on what they called Islamic terrorism. We don't have to get into semantics. Islamist would be the right term, people who've exploited and perverted a peaceful religion for violent purposes. But in any event, they wanted to focus on Islam as a threat in a strategy and not on domestic terrorist groups. And that was politicized, and it was not based on the
Did it rhyme with Beb Sorka?
Let me ask you this question.
Old Beb up to her tricks again.
Let me ask you this question. Today all over the streets in Louisville, we have the Boogaloo Boys. We have, militia that's out there. When I watch that, am I looking at the early days of Trump's brown shirts?
You know what's interesting? I had a conversation with someone about this today, and this is not going to be a direct answer to your question, Steve, but this is where my head goes when you say that. And when I think of what happened with ISIS, I think about an organization that the U.S. government was monitoring, and we thought we had a handle on it. We thought we could keep up with this movement because the foreign intelligence agencies at the time looked overseas and we said, we know who most of the bad guys are. And, we've got them in our sights, and they're contained in this region where we've got U.S. forces to go after them. Okay. But they grew so quickly and it spread like wildfire that all of a sudden we had 17-year-olds in basements in Boston being radicalized by their propaganda. And that spread more quickly than the U.S. government could handle it. And part of that was instigated by social media and any number of other things in the world. When I look at what's happening right now with domestic terrorism, I worry that we're in that same period of complacency we were in when the Obama administration was slow in responding to the rise of ISIS. It's very clearly a threat, and one that can turn into a brush fire like that. And right now, we've got these movements around the country, and hopefully DHS and FBI officials feel like they've got enough folks that understand the networks. But what they can't anticipate is that Donald Trump's rhetorical support for what they're doing and his rhetorical support for the conspiracy theories that undergird their narrative could turn the thing from a discrete problem into that brush fire almost overnight. And that's what we can't prepare for, and need to check their rhetoric and need to avoid loose talk, because they can instigate that type of behavior that turns bad rhetoric into violence overnight.
Well, that's terrifying.
Terrifying.
A little bit, yeah.
It's terrifying. Between those people, and then you have, the Baghdad Bob female version as a press secretary, and all the others that are out there just lying through their teeth, telling us that the sun doesn't rise in the east or set in the west. It's really, really scary stuff that is reminiscent of Nazi Germany and Mussolini, and all those fascist regimes. I mean, the tactics are similar, and we're not blowing this out of proportion. We're just not. It's historical perspective that we can point to. That it's just, oh my gosh. Miles, now that you have sufficiently scared us to death.
It's
not even October yet.
Baghdad Bob was a piker compared to these people. I mean,
for sure. I'm telling you, it's.
I believe our production crew needs to have an asset for me next show of Kaylee Mendacity dressed in the Baghdad Bob fatigues and beret. Get on it, y'all.
Yeah, please do. That would be fantastic.
All right.
Let's take some viewer questions. Miles, his stories are fascinating, and imagine if we were doing this and drinking adult beverages at the same time. The way that the stories, we might get some names next time. We'll have to do that when it's safe for us all to be together. Let's take some viewer questions.
Those of you that are watching should be able to have adult beverages. So even if we can't, I hope you are.
Please do. Please
America.
do. It's the only way to make it through this. All right, let's see. What's up first? Ask the breakdown. Alyssa Goldberg, if they prepared to steal the presidency, wouldn't that mean they'd steal the Senate as well? It seems that if the Dems take the Senate, impeachment is inevitable. Steve, do you think that that's even a possibility?
I don't. I bounce up and down on this day to day. There's a lot of worrisome developments that are going on that seem really nefarious to me. But at the end of the day, as a broad proposition, I think the votes are going to be counted, and I think that the system is going to hold. And I don't think Donald Trump is going to be successful in stealing the election. But all I can say is that the one thing that we all have the ability to control is to vote. And the most important thing that can happen to this country, the best thing, is that we get rid of the country's biggest problem as early as possible on election night. And that starts in the state of Florida. Let's defeat Trump in Florida, and Trump's path to be president starts to shut down early. And that's what everyone should be focused on right now. And you got to be focused on what we can control. And what we can control is voting. Democratic National Committee, a lot of the outside groups, ACLU, the Biden campaign, are armed to the teeth with the lawyers. We know that there's a lot of Trump lawsuits that are taking place in the country. We have to be vigilant on it. But I mean, our focus has to be is vote, end this catastrophe.
You know what? Before we go to the next one, since you're talking about voting, I just want to remind people that in-person voting is underway right now. And it's in several states, including my home state right now, Virginia. We have Alabama, Minnesota, Missouri, Pennsylvania, South Dakota, and Wyoming. So if you live in any of those states, you can go and begin your voting today, right now. And early voting starts tomorrow in Michigan and Illinois. So as a reminder, we will continually remind people when and where you can vote in your states. Make sure you're registered and make sure you go and cast your ballot, or you can mail it in. But in-person voting underway in the states that we just listed.
And if you're if you're voting by mail, make sure it goes into the proper envelope. If you're voting in this administration, make a list of the top 10 people who might fuck up putting the ballot into the right envelope, and make sure that they do not. Make sure it goes into the right envelope. Look
so wait
to your
a minute.
left, you're right. Call your parents, call your sister. Make sure it goes in the right envelope.
So that should be the next Lincoln Project postcard, right? We're going to send Lincoln Project postcards out that say, when you vote by mail, do not fuck up. paid for by the Lincoln Project.
It's very on brand. It's very, very on brand.
This is
That's my contribution.
It's like attention, American people. This is the number one most important thing not to fuck up in 2020. Is putting this into the right envelope.
There you
Sign
go.
it in the right place, right envelope.
Okay, let's go to the next question from our studio audience.
Hi, my name is Grace. I grew up in a religious cult who told us always to vote Republican no matter what. I left 4 years ago and I did not vote in 2016. Tomorrow I'm voting for Biden. My question is, if the bad orange cheats the election, what does this mean for women? Will we no longer be able to vote? And will we turn into the handmaid's tale? Thank you.
Well, look, I don't want to exaggerate the risks too greatly about Donald Trump. If he is reelected and we're unable to stop him, what you should be afraid of is Mike Pence, who does have a very strange and dark view of things that might look a little more like that. But I will say this: America is going to be put to many, many tests in the coming years, and we have to be wary of, as Steve says, the democratic rescission, and that's a small d democratic rescission around the world. But we also have to be wary of American rights being corroded or rolled back. And there is a belief on the right at this moment, the Trump right specifically, that whatever you do to win is okay. Whatever the goal line is okay. Whatever the stakeholders in your particular part of the coalition need to get to, it's okay. So it is going to be a tough time. I don't want to panic you, but you should get active and get involved and get out there and vote and make sure that you are encouraging your friends to do the same.
Let me just say something about that too before we go to the next question. As someone who watches The Handmaid's Tale and got my mom to watch The Handmaid's Tale, and I've watched it in just sheer horror because of some of the language and some of the scenarios that are eerily reminiscent of things that we've seen. There's a scene in the first season where it's a flashback to before Gilead happens, where the main character, June, you hear her say, "How did we get here? How did we allow this to happen?" And that sent chills down my spine because I don't want to be that person or have anybody else look back and say, how did we get here? How did we allow this to happen? If Donald Trump gets reelected and we see our democracy ripped apart at its seams. So we're not at Handmaid's Tale level yet. And I don't think we'll ever see something quite like that. But we're at DEFCON 1. It is a 5-alarm fire. And we need to make sure, and especially people, that viewer sounded like she was very young. Your generation needs to get out there and vote. If you can protest, you can get your ass to the polling station and vote. So we need that. We need everyone, that demographic particularly, out there registered and voting.
So I'm a Handmaid's Tale fan, and I watch it religiously. And I think the point is,
so you know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about. And I look at Gilead and I'm like, oh boy. But I think Mike Pence might look at Gilead and be like, that's a nice place to retire to. And I think that
it's the villages for religious extremists.
It's like the villages, but better. And no, but listen, this is we're at this moment with the Supreme Court, right? That James Madison wrote about in Federalist 10. What they talk about in Federalist 10 is that the danger to liberty is faction, right? Because you could have a faction, meaning a party, that would press ahead and impose its will, even over the minority, with disregard to their rights, in a way that's contrary to the public good. So you can look right now at this Supreme Court issue, and you can say, for example, the Republican position can be this. Well, fuck it. We're in charge. We can do whatever we want. Right?
That's basically what they said now.
Gymnastics, right? That's at least honest. Second thing they could say is, listen, that was wrong what we did back then, but conservative justice on the Supreme Court is really important. They could say that, but the one thing they can never say, and look, I ran the Roberts and Alito confirmations when I was in the Bush White House. I was asked to be supportive of Kagan and Sotomayor in the Obama administration. I think presidential elections have consequences, but because of what happened to Merrick Garland, you can't say, and this is what Federalist 10 is about, that the actions of the faction are for the public good. There's no public good here. This is contrary to the public good because the country is so divided. And wisdom would dictate you step back away from the line, that you show some restraint. But we won't get that in this moment, unfortunately. And so you have the people who are appointing justices. Increasingly, we're not even necessarily going to have hearings on this judge. Every one of these senators has said that they're going to vote for the nominee before we know who the nominee is. It used to be that
it's Ivanka.
We're going to have hearings. Yeah, Trump should just say fuck it. I'm putting Tiffany on.
It's Ivanka.
Well, listen, in a second term,
let's be honest. Tiffany's never going to get it. Yeah, Tiffany's never going to get it over Ivanka.
Poor Tiffany.
No. Poor thing.
Mr. Chief Justice Kushner.
Oh God, please. Now that's Gilead. What's our next tweet?
If administration insiders are terrified of what they see, how are they not moving on the 25th Amendment? Folks, I'm sorry. I wish I could tell you better news about the 25th Amendment. It's never going to happen. It was never going to happen. Donald Trump could walk out on the White House lawn, buck naked, covered in chocolate pudding, and they still would go in the cabinet room and say, that's a great look. They will not do the 25th Amendment. I wish it was true. It's not going to happen.
They'd be like, we have to have vanilla pudding for the cabinet meeting.
Well, let me tell you this. I mean, I want to comment on the 25th because there was a lot of speculation early in this administration that quietly there were members of the cabinet and senior advisors at the White House talking about whether the 25th Amendment needed to be invoked against the president. And anyone who's watching right now who's asking or frantically Googling what the hell is the 25th Amendment, right? It's the amendment of the Constitution that allows for the removal of a president when they're incapacitated or unable to fulfill the duties of their office. Certainly, there were people who so hated Donald Trump that when he came in, before he even signed his first executive order, said, remove him with the 25th Amendment. It gives the cabinet the ability to remove a president. But the people around the president who may have participated in these brief conversations or who it was suggested to really, really quickly came to the conclusion that in Donald Trump's America and how polarized we are,
a couple more tweets.
Were they ever to remove a president who had been duly elected by the populace, that the outcry and the civil unrest that would be created would outweigh any benefit gained by taking that individual out of power, especially when it would be difficult to prove that the individual actually couldn't discharge the functions of their office. Now, let me be clear about Donald Trump. I don't believe he's able to discharge the functions of his office in a way that's honorable or American or what we'd expect from a commander-in-chief. I think he's a bad president. I don't think that means he's actually unable to show up every day and sign executive orders. And that's how a lot of folks felt around the president, is it would need to reach a level that was intended by that amendment, that someone is actually physically unable to do their job. That said, the more important thing here is we don't want a bunch of unelected bureaucrats around the president to make that decision for us. The beauty is the founders designed a system where we get to make that decision. That's why November 3rd is our moment. That's why November 3rd is vastly more important than the 25th Amendment, because we get to decide whether we want him or not, and that will give it the air of legitimacy that we need. We don't want people for centuries saying, Donald Trump was removed in a coup in the United States. No, we will remove him through the democratic process and democratic means, and we will own it, and he will have to accept it.
They're already accusing the coup of happening. You're part of the deep state. We're all part of the coup already. So God forbid if the 25th Amendment was ever invoked. But I'm glad that you brought that up because people, they talk about that all the time. That was, coming out as palace intrigue when Rod Rosenstein allegedly brought up the 25th Amendment talk during the Comey chaos in the first year of the first 6 months of the administration. So I think it's important for people to understand that the 25th Amendment is really a Hollywood thing. It's really never going to be invoked in real life in the situation like this, unless something happened to the president. What else? What do we have next? Oh,
who would want to apply the 25th Amendment to such a successful president? I mean, just look at his health care plan. Can we check in on where Kaylee's at on the health care plan, folks?
That's about where the healthcare plan is.
It's an experiment, people.
Can we do Fauci? Yep. Still waiting.
We're gonna beat that joke until it's dead, folks. Just count on it.
Until there's a healthcare plan. Until there's a healthcare plan.
It's coming.
That's right.
2 weeks. Just be patient.
So it's the money pit.
All right.
But before we go to another viewer question, there's something happened today that we have not forgotten about coronavirus. We have not forgotten about this shit show of global pandemic that we're still in. People are dying every day, and the experts, this administration and their collaborators, continue to downplay this and try to discredit the experts. There was a hearing today on the Senate side that I want to play a clip from, where there was this exchange between Dr. Fauci and Senator Rand Paul.
You've lauded New York for their policy. New York had the highest death rate in the world. How could we possibly be jumping up and down and saying, oh, Governor Cuomo did a great job? He had the worst death rate in the world.
No, you misconstrued that, Senator, and you've done that repetitively in the past. They got hit very badly. They've made some mistakes. Right now, if you look at what's going on right now, the things that are going on in New York to get their test positivity 1% or less is because they are looking at the guidelines that we have put together from the task force of the 4 or 5 things of masks, social distancing, outdoors more than indoors, avoiding crowds, and washing hands.
Or they've developed enough community immunity that they're no longer having the pandemic because they have enough immunity in New York City to actually stop.
I challenge that. Senator, because I want to, please, sir, I would like to be able to do this because this happens with Senator Rand all the time. You were not listening to what the director of the CDC said, that in New York, it's about 22%. If you believe 22% is herd immunity, I believe you're alone in that.
Rand Paul is one of the most obnoxious jerks in the Senate, and I am so glad that Dr. Fauci finally went straight New York on him and basically told him to shut the hell up. And this is how I feel because I'm a huge fan.
Oh,
Good for you, Dr. Fauci. It's about time that somebody put that Rand Paul in his place.
And you know what, Tara? There's nothing that brings America together like dunking on Rand Paul. It's a it's one of the few bipartisan joys in this country.
It's so him and Ted Cruz. I don't know who's worse.
My only thought watching it was we are afloat upon a ship of fools. We truly are.
Yep. Every day we're reminded of that.
A ship of fools.
What's sad about it, Steve? Well, there's a lot of things that are sad about it, but these are people who a lot of us know on this screen. We talk to privately. We have dinners and cocktails with them. And a lot of these senators behind the scenes will get off the phone, or we used to. Some of us are persona non grata. We're PNG'd from those circles with pride. But these are people who would say to us behind the scenes, look, the president's completely crazy. He's totally unfit for office. He's a lunatic. He called me the other night and said, da-da-da-da-da-da, and I can't even believe he said it. And then they'll go to the microphone like Rand Paul, and they'll spout his rhetoric, and they'll defend him, and they'll have his back. I've always said that there was a worse epidemic than coronavirus. And the real plague in America is the spinelessness pandemic. And it has swept Washington, D.C., and it has hit the Republican Party so fiercely hard that these elected politicians who claim to be moral, principles-based conservatives have abandoned the party and their principles and their own consciences in slavish appreciation of Donald Trump. And there's going to be a reckoning, and they're going to have to account for that after this period.
They sure will.
Folks, let's do we have one more question? Let's play the next voicemail.
The Lincoln Project is also going to be working after the election, whoever wins, in order to see to it that people from this particular administration who have been corrupt are also held to standards and put in jail or do whatever is necessary after the election. Are you going to carry through so that the corrupt people are no longer are exposed and are no longer able to
going to be the last one?
Governmental policy? Thank you very much.
I'd like to say something about this. There's one thing that we should stop immediately in this country. It's this. Please, I beg everybody, let's stop talking about locking up our political opponents. Stop it. Right? The Lincoln Project is not the arm that's going to hold Donald Trump or anybody accountable legally or to advocate for their imprisonment. We have to be fidelitous to a system of the rule of law that's been profoundly strained. We have a lot of things to fix. But look, going back to 2016, remember sitting on the air at MSNBC at the Republican convention, holy shit, watching a convention of one of the two great political parties in the country chanting, lock her up, lock her up, lock her up. No, we don't do that in the United States of America. This is a terribly slippery slope. Look, we have authorities in different jurisdictions. I think the sad reality is Trump isn't going away. Trumpism isn't going away. We'll fight them politically. We'll try to defeat them at the ballot box. All over the world, we see democracy in decline and in retreat. We want to be an American democracy organization that works with partners across Europe to advocate for liberal democracy. And by liberal democracy, I don't mean the left of the Democratic Party. I mean, small L liberal democracy, the values of the Enlightenment, the government of the people, by the people, for the people. That a free society is the best form of government to live in. And that's what we stand for. That's what we're going to fight for.
Steve, I got to echo that point because we talked at the top end of tonight about how Donald Trump is displaying authoritarian impulses. And the worst thing that we could possibly do is parrot his rhetoric and mirror his behavior. And in our resentment of what he's done, try to do the same thing. And that's where lock her up gets misused on the other side when everyone says, I can't wait to see the orange man in an orange jumpsuit. I get that that's satisfying to say, but that's not the democratic outcome that we want. We should never want our president to go to prison unless the facts demonstrate and a court demonstrates and the judicial system demonstrates that he or she has violated the law, and that's the appropriate outcome. But we shouldn't wish for that. We shouldn't want that. And in fact, when this is all over, the best thing we can do is put it in the rearview mirror and move on. And the best thing Joe Biden can do is wake up every morning, not angry tweet at the world, and maybe occasionally give a few good speeches that make Americans feel like they're united around shared values. That will go a long way in repairing this country. It's just moving on from this period of Donald Trump.
Never become what you despise.
Truth. Well, folks, it has been a longer show than usual tonight. We hope you've enjoyed it. We have certainly enjoyed having Miles on with us and Steve. And I want to also remind everybody that there's another show coming on LPTV starting tomorrow, which is hosted by our good friend and co-founder Jennifer Horn. It will be streaming on our Lincoln Project YouTube channel, and you can click there for links and information on it. It's going to be at noon East Coast time, if I am not mistaken. Now join us again tomorrow night when we will be joined by guest Mike Madrid and Kurt Bardella. Thanks so much, folks. Have a great night.